Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm a bit slow getting this video uploaded. I apologize for the delay. I've been distracted with some harsh realities of life, such as having to move from one location to another, but you know how stressful that can be. But anyway, it's good to be back. Have a lot of ground to cover. In my last video, I discussed the man of lawlessness, or the Antichrist, and how he will one day make a 7-year agreement with Israel, and that he will actually literally sit down in a rebuilt temple and proclaim himself to be God. In this video or series of videos on the Antichrist, we will look deeper into the scriptures and see from which part of the world the Antichrist will emerge from, because the scriptures have a lot to say about that. Since the next few videos will be about the Antichrist's place of origin and the Antichrist in general, I will be calling this video part 1 in a series, since I will be focusing most of my attention on the Antichrist. We will take a look at the prophecies of the Old Testament prophets such as Isaiah and Micah, the prophet Joel and Ezekiel and others, and how they talked about the end times Antichrist. We will also look at Daniel's dream image in Daniel chapter 2, and also take a look at Daniel's beast in Daniel chapter 7, and also the beasts of Revelation. So there's quite a lot to discuss in the next series of videos here. Did you know that the Antichrist is called the Assyrian in several passages in the Old Testament? Assyria is the kingdom of northern Mesopotamia that became the center of one of the great empires of the ancient Middle East. It was located in what is now northern Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran. The theme of the Assyrian is found primarily in the books of Isaiah and Micah. Both of these prophets prophesied in great detail concerning both Jesus the Messiah as well as the Antichrist. This theme that runs through the prophecies of both Isaiah and Micah portray the final conflict between Jesus the Messiah and the Antichrist, who throughout these prophecies is referred to again and again as the Assyrian. Before we get into these prophecies, it's important to understand that the secret to good Bible study is discovering the links between the Old and the New Testaments. Almost all of the Old Testament prophets spoke about the day of Yahweh and the end times, which obviously is referring to the final battle of Armageddon. Also, most of the prophets referred to the Messianic kingdom and how God would restore Jerusalem's temple that would heal not only the Jewish people, but how the whole world would be blessed because of this kingdom. The prophets Jeremiah, Malachi, Amos, Obadiah, Ezekiel, Zephaniah, Zechariah, Habakkuk, Daniel, Isaiah, Micah, and Hosea all were used by God to warn the people to obey God's laws and the consequences of idolatry and other serious sins, and how they would be punished by the surrounding nations if they didn't listen. But all the prophets also gave the nation hope that one day, no matter how bad the people suffered as a nation, God would one day in the future restore Jerusalem in the Messianic kingdom. So all the prophets spoke about the Messianic kingdom, and many Christians aren't aware of that. So for that reason they ignore the Old Testament, thinking that it somehow doesn't apply to Christians. Most mistakes in Bible study occur when the connections to the Old Testament prophets are broken. Sad to say, much of traditional Christian orthodoxy today is based on a Greek philosophical reading of the New Testament, completely severed from the Old Testament. However, when Jesus explained the Bible, he began with Moses and with all the prophets expounding the scriptures. As Luke chapter 24 says, in the 25th verse, it says, "And he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things, and after that to enter into his glory? And beginning from Moses and from all the prophets, he explained to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." So we should follow the example of Jesus and focus on the Old Testament as well as the New. Amazingly, some Christians never study the Old Testament, thinking it doesn't apply to our day and the future. So we need to understand how important the Old Testament prophets are, as they spoke clearly about the day of Yahweh's anger and the importance of the Messianic kingdom. Some of the prophets even spoke about the Antichrist reign during the end times, which we will be getting into. The first passage mentioned in the Bible about the Assyrian ruling in the end times that I would like to discuss is mentioned in Micah, the 5th chapter. Before we get to that verse, let's discuss what the book of Micah is all about. The prophet Micah was a contemporary of Isaiah. He lived in a small village named Moresheth, not far from the city of Gath, which was destroyed by the Assyrians when they invaded Judah. Micah and Isaiah had very similar messages to the people of Jerusalem, but Micah was a country preacher while Isaiah was a court preacher. Micah was God's final prophet to the northern kingdom of Samaria during the reigns of King Jotham, King Ahaz, and King Hezekiah. He prophesied from approximately 737 to 696 BCE. Micah's message was directed to those who were responsible for the corruption which had spread over the two kingdoms of Judah and Samaria. I have a video on how wicked the kings of Judah and Samaria were. If you haven't seen that, go back and check that video out. There are 7 chapters to the book of Micah. Micah chapter 1 announces the doom that is to befall Samaria for her idolatry, and how God would use the surrounding nations, in this case Assyria, to punish the corrupt nation. Micah chapter 2 is a message of woe for the ruling classes because of their oppression of the poor. In this chapter, Micah records the attempts of these men to do away with his preaching. Chapter 3, the sins of the ruling classes, as well as the false prophets and priests, are dealt with. In Micah chapter 4, the tone of Micah's prophecy shifts abruptly in the opening verses of Micah, as Micah pictures the future glory of Jerusalem or Zion in the millennial kingdom of God. In Micah 4:9, however, he suddenly continues his previous message of impending doom. A remarkable prophecy is contained in Micah 4:10, as Babylon is named as the conqueror of Judah, although at that time Assyria was the leading world power, and Judah by no means appeared safe from her threats. But about 100 years later, the prophecy was fulfilled as Judah, having survived the Assyrian conquests, was overrun by the forces of Babylon. In Micah chapter 5, Micah foretells a number of marvelous prophecies about the Messiah, from his birth to his second coming, when he will establish the millennial kingdom. Micah 5 verse 2, it is stated that a ruler for Israel will come out of Bethlehem, a prophecy regarding Jesus' birthplace 700 years before it occurred. Micah 5 verse 2, it says, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, being small among the clans of Judah, out from you will come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel," obviously speaking of Jesus, "whose comings forth are from of old, from ancient times." Here Micah speaks about how Jesus will rule over Israel in the golden millennial age and will be a king specifically chosen by God. He will have only a humble beginning, being born in the small Judean town of Bethlehem, but his ancestry will go back to ancient times, to the great King David, who himself came from Bethlehem and whose dynasty was guaranteed by God to last forever. This king will have full right to David's throne, and through him, God's promises to David will be fulfilled. Of course, Trinitarians try to use this verse to teach the Trinity, but it has absolutely nothing to do with that at all. Micah 5th chapter verse 3 says, "Therefore he will abandon them until the time that she who is in labor gives birth. Then the rest of his brothers will return to the children of Israel." Here Micah 5:3 refers to the time of Messiah's rejection at his first coming, until Israel's regathering at Messiah's second coming. Israel has been persecuted and dominated by Gentiles since 70 AD and is yet to undergo its greatest time of suffering during the Great Tribulation, as Jeremiah chapter 30 brings out. At that time, Israel's suffering will be like the birth pangs of a woman, but after her delivery will come joy. A remnant in Israel will go through the affliction of the Great Tribulation, according to the Bible, and experience regeneration at the Messiah's second coming, and then be regathered to enjoy eternal kingdom blessings, which will be extended to the rest of mankind. Micah 5 verse 4 says, "And he, Jesus, will stand and will shepherd in the strength of Yahweh, in the majesty of the name of Yahweh his God. And they will live, for then he will be great to the ends of the earth." Here Micah is describing Jesus' messianic reign again. He will stand as ruler in the millennial kingdom and will feed or shepherd the restored remnant of Israel. Like a shepherd, he will lead, protect, and tenderly care for his people. His rule will manifest the majesty or the heavenly glory and power of Yahweh on earth. Israel shall abide or dwell in the land safely and securely in perpetuity and prosperity. Messiah's rule will not be over Israel alone, of course, but also his chosen ones of the new covenant, who will rule alongside him for the 1,000 years. Now we get to Micah chapter 5, verse 5. Here, during the Great Tribulation, the Messiah will subdue Israel's enemies. And this is the verse regarding the Assyrian, who will attack Jerusalem during the Antichrist reign. Micah 5, verse 5, it says, He, Jesus, will be our peace when Assyria invades our land, and when he marches through our fortresses. Then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 leaders of men. Verse 6 says, They will shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod with a drawn sword. Goes on, He will deliver us from the Assyrian when he invades our land and when he marches inside our border. The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many peoples like dew from Yahweh, like showers on the grass that do not wait for man, nor wait for the sons of men. So this part of Micah foretells that the Jews will return to God during the Great Tribulation and be restored spiritually, as verse 7 we just read refers to a remnant of Jacob, or Israel. The Assyrian here mentioned in Micah 5 is not the Assyria that invaded Judah in 701 BCE, but is a symbol for the future invading Antichrist and his coalition who will come against Israel during the Great Tribulation. When the invaders attack God's people, the coming Messiah will repel the attack, for God will give them unusual strength to overcome their enemies. So the Bible foretells that Israel will be attacked by these nations from the Middle East. Nimrod founded the kingdom of Babel, as mentioned in Genesis chapter 10, but the land of Nimrod symbolizes the whole Babylonian Assyrian Empire. So the attack on God's people by the armies of the Antichrist will occur in Jerusalem literally in the last days. The Middle East is a place that we as Christians need to watch because the final war against God's people in the Middle East is the trigger that sets off the Great Tribulation and draws the rest of the world into conflict. In the final analysis, it will not be Israel's leaders who deliver the nation at the end of the Great Tribulation, but the Messiah, as mentioned in the Bible, Zechariah chapter 14 and Revelation chapter 19. Revelation 19:15 says, And out of his mouth comes a sharp broadsword, so that with it he can strike down the nations, and he will shepherd them with a rod of iron, and he treads the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. A remnant of saved Jewish people will survive the Great Tribulation and will become a blessing to the Gentiles in the millennial kingdom. Micah 5:7 says, The remnant of Jacob will be in the midst of many peoples, like dew from Yahweh, like showers on the grass that do not wait for man, nor wait for the sons of men. Restored Israel will bring continual spiritual blessings to the nations as dew and showers refresh the ground after a long dry spell. Some Christians today wrongly think that God is finished in his dealings with the Jews, but as we see here, the Bible is very clear that God will restore a remnant just before Christ returns. Not all Jews will repent, of course, but a remnant absolutely will, as the Bible says. So talking negatively about the Jews is counterproductive and goes against God's plan and his purposes for his people. With the redeemed remnant restored to Israel and the Messiah ruling on the earth, the entire world will be blessed with peace and prosperity. Then the long-awaited promises God made to Abraham and David through the covenants will be completely fulfilled for Israel. And Micah chapters 6 and 7 are a continuation of the picture of moral corruption and resultant punishment, but with an assurance that God will show compassion for Israel and will allow a remnant to flourish again, thus keeping the promise which he had made to Abraham. So the book of Micah, as we see, the Assyrian is mentioned as the existing world power of the Antichrist when Christ returns to save the remnant of Israel, and also, of course, his elect during the Great Tribulation period. Micah wasn't the only Old Testament prophet who spoke about the Antichrist coalition coming from the Middle East, as we will see later. The Assyrian Empire held sway over Babylonia, parts of Media, Armenia, Syria, Cyprus, Arabia, and Egypt for 700 years. Their religion was borrowed from the Babylonians, except the name of their chief god was Ashur instead of Baal, the chief god of the Babylonians. By 625 BCE, Babylonian independence was secured by Nabopolassar, and the great Babylonian Empire began to run roughshod over the Middle East. So Babylon rose out of the ashes, so to speak, of the Assyrian Empire. Both powers ruled over the same territory. It was the same system, only under different rulers. When we read of Assyria and Babylon in these end-time prophecies, we understand they are speaking of the same people, the same system, and the same territory located in the Middle East. The Assyrian Empire, the second biblical world kingdom, encompassed Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Jordan, Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. As God used the Assyrian to judge the disobedient nation of Israel in ancient times, God will again call on the northern invader to judge modern-day Israel as well. The Assyrian shall also exist in the end times. In this map of Israel you can see here, you can see how Syria was located to the north of Jerusalem and how Egypt was located to the south. Thus we have the king of the north and the king of the south that the Bible speaks about. Like I mentioned earlier, other Old Testament prophets spoke of the end times and this Assyrian world power. The prophet Isaiah also spoke about the Assyrian existing in end times in Isaiah chapter 10. Both of these prophets prophesied in great detail concerning both Jesus the Messiah as well as the Antichrist. The theme that runs through the prophecies of both Isaiah and Micah is the final conflict between Jesus the Messiah and the Antichrist, who throughout these prophecies is referred to again and again as the Assyrian. I will get to Isaiah's prophecy about the Assyrian later on, but for now, let's go to the book of Daniel and take a look at Daniel's dream image and the Gentile beastly powers that have ruled over God's people and will be ruling during the Antichrist reign. In Daniel chapter 2, Daniel interprets a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 19, it says, "Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding." Verse 24 says, "Therefore Daniel went in to see Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and spoke to him as follows, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation." Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said thus to him, "I have found a man of the children of the captivity of Judah, who will make known to the king the interpretation." So Daniel goes on to describe the king's dream in verse 31, where he says, "You were looking, O king, and behold, there was a large statue. The statue, which was mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was awesome. As for this statue, its head was of fine gold, its breasts and its arms were of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet part of iron and part of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out, but not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet that were part of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces." Verse 34 here shows how the stone represents God's kingdom that will destroy all existing world powers in the future and grind them into nothingness all at the same time, and then the kingdom of God will fill the entire earth. Daniel then explained the meaning of the four metallic sections of the statue to the king. The first section, the head of gold, represents Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian kingdom. He says, "This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, you are the head of gold." The sections of the statue that follow represent three other kingdoms that would succeed Babylon, each one possessing its former dominion. When one consults nearly any commentary on the subject, the three kingdoms to follow are understood to be Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. But while Medo-Persia and Greece are later mentioned in Daniel chapter 8, verses 20 through 21, where in verse 20 the two-horned ram is said to be Media and Persia, and in verse 21 the shaggy goat is the king of Greece. Interestingly, though, the fourth empire is never specifically named. Despite this fact, many Bible translations, so confident of the Roman identity of the Fourth Empire, actually add the name Rome into the subheadings of their Bibles. Yet as surprising as this claim may come to many, as we are about to see, the various criteria contained within the text, as well as the clear testimony of history, make it impossible to confidently identify the final kingdom as the Roman Empire. The idea that Rome is the fourth kingdom is such a widely held position that many will not even entertain any suggestion to the contrary. This is entirely understandable, because this has been a major position throughout much of church history. When I was young, I was also taught that the fourth empire of this dream was Rome as well. However, as we will see, there are several significant, perhaps even fatal difficulties with this Roman interpretation. The first problem with the Roman identification of the fourth kingdom is that the Roman Empire does not meet the specific criteria of Daniel chapter 2, verse 40. And this verse speaks of the nature of the rise of the fourth kingdom. The text specifically says that at the time of its rise, the fourth kingdom would crush all three of the other kingdoms. You can read that in Daniel 2:40, where it says, "And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others." Later in Daniel chapter 7, speaking of this same empire, we find a very similar description. Daniel 7, verse 23, it says, "Thus he said, As for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces." The three other kingdoms that would be trampled and crushed, as we already know, are Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. The text is clear that the fourth kingdom would crush or conquer all these three other empires. The three empires never coexisted together, of course, so we must ask what the text means when it says that the fourth empire would crush all of the others. The first meaning of the word crush is simply referring to geography. If you examine ancient maps, it's clear that the Roman Empire only conquered roughly 1/3 of the regions controlled by Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. Roughly 2/3 of the regions controlled by these empires were left entirely untouched by the Roman Empire. In fact, the Roman Empire never even reached the two Persian capitals of Ecbatana and Persepolis. The Bible text is clear. In order to fulfill the criteria of Daniel 2:40, an empire would need to crush not one, but all three of these other kingdoms. And the Roman Empire simply does not fulfill this requirement. Some have attempted to get around this problem by claiming that because the Roman Empire succeeded Greece, which succeeded Medo-Persia, which succeeded Babylon, so forth, it's right to say that the Roman Empire did crush all the others. While this is a rather common view, not only is it based on faulty reasoning, it is also simply not what the text says. The text simply does not say that one would succeed another, that would succeed another, and so forth. It says the fourth kingdom would crush all the others. If we are to be faithful to the text, we must adhere to what the text actually states. Although the Roman Empire did conquer portions of the land holdings of the other empires, it clearly did not conquer all of them, not even a majority of them. The Roman Empire only conquered roughly 1/5 of the land holdings of the Medo-Persian Empire, whose capital cities of Ecbatana and Persepolis forever remained hundreds of miles out of the Roman Empire's reach. If we are to be honest, to say the Roman Empire fulfilled the criteria of Daniel 2:40 would be a stretch at best. On the other hand, the nation of Islam fully and absolutely completely conquered all of the lands mentioned in Daniel 2, verse 40. But what if we expand the definition of crush to include more than mere geography? What if the purpose of the repeated descriptions of the beast crushing and treading everything underfoot are intended to convey more than just gaining control over a geographic region, but include the crushing of culture, religion, and language as well? With this expanded definition in mind, what happens when we compare the Roman Empire to the Islamic Empire? Commentators have applied much hype to the Roman Empire as a crushing entity, often referencing the strength of the Roman military and its great ability to crush rebellions. But is putting down rebellion sufficient to satisfy the dramatic descriptions the Bible is speaking about? When we consider the nature of the Roman Empire, it was far from being a purely destructive influence to its conquered peoples. In fact, the Roman Empire is quite well known for being a nation-building force of the ancient world. When the Roman Empire conquered a people, rather than destroying the culture, abolishing the religion, and imposing a new language, it generally tolerated these things while adding law, building roads, infrastructure, and creating order. The famous Roman roads reached every corner of the Roman Empire. These were well-built, stone-covered roads laid on solid foundations. In order to control their territories, the Romans needed easy access even to its most outlying provinces. Roads also caused trade to prosper, which brought with it more taxes. Eventually, every town and city of the empire was connected by an elaborate system of Roman-built roads. This led to the famous phrase, "All roads lead to Rome." Roman law and the protection of its military also created a peace and stability that came to be famously known as the Pax Romana, a Latin phrase for Roman peace. So far from being a crushing force, the Roman Empire was often a positive influence to its conquered peoples. Beyond infrastructure, while the Romans expected to receive taxes and an acknowledgement of Caesar, by ancient standards they were a very tolerant empire. During Jesus' day, the Jewish temple stood prominently in Jerusalem under Roman authority, and the Jews practiced their religion freely. Roman law protected the Jews' right to practice their religion. While there were exceptions, such as a brief period of persecution under Emperor Caligula, throughout the majority of its reign, the Roman Empire was relatively tolerant. When we ponder the idea of being a culturally destructive entity, it becomes apparent that this serves as a problem for the association of the Roman Empire with Daniel's fourth beast. Consider, for example, the relationship of the Roman Empire to Greek culture. Rather than crushing Greek culture, instead, much of the Roman Empire was overwhelmed by Greek ways. Under Roman hegemony during Jesus' day, Greek was a dominant language throughout the Middle East. With regard to religion, much of the adopted culture adopted the pagan Greek pantheon of gods. While the names were changed, the basic pantheon remained the same. Zeus became Jupiter, Artemis became Diana, Aphrodite became Venus, and so forth. In considering the requisite of being a culturally destructive force, it would seem apparent that the Roman Empire was not the crushing power that is being referred to in Daniel chapter 2, verse 40. In contrast to the Roman Empire, when we look at the Islamic world power, it's clear that from its inception, it was an Arab Islamic supremacist force that crushed and erased the cultures and religions of the peoples it conquered. This is due to the uniquely all-encompassing ideology of Islam, which encompasses every facet of life. Islam has rules and commandments that pertain to far more than just theology. Islam also encompasses law, government, language, military, and even the sexual and hygienic practices of those under its authority. The very name Islam means submission to the laws of Allah, the God of Islam, as well as the practices of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. Islam is the epitome of a totalitarian ideology. Wherever Islam is spread, it brought with it this totalitarian ideology of submission. Islam conquered all the regions of the former Babylonian, Medo-Persian, and the Grecian empires. Here's a map of the territory that Islam conquered during its rule. Islam exported and imposed the Arabic language onto a vast proportion of its conquered peoples. Today in Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and throughout much of North Africa, the people speak the exported language of Arabic. Wherever Islam has spread, the conquered culture is gradually erased. The symbols and evidences of that former culture are destroyed. The religion of the conquered peoples are most particularly targeted. This is the heritage of Islam, the perfect fulfillment of the criterion of Daniel 2, verse 40. Islam is a crushing power that tramples the residue with its feet. While the Islamic Empire fulfills this biblical description to a T, it is very difficult to force the Roman Empire to fit this description. The distinction between these two empires must be seriously considered as we attempt to discern the accurate identity of the fourth beast empire. The second problem for the Roman identification of the Fourth Empire is the criteria of Daniel 2, verses 34 through 35. This time, instead of the rise of the fourth kingdom, these verses speak of its demise, the day of its destruction. This text speaks of the return of the Messiah and his kingdom. His kingdom is described as a rock cut out, but not with human hands. The Messianic kingdom specifically destroys the final kingdom of the Antichrist, but in so doing we see that by virtue of the destruction of the Antichrist kingdom, Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece are also all destroyed at the same time. Notice this in Daniel 2, verse 34. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time, and became like chaff on the threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. Simply stated, if the Roman Empire were fully revived today to the point of its greatest extent, and Jesus returned and fully destroyed it, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece would not by virtue all be destroyed at the same time. Although a large portion of the land holdings of these empires would be destroyed, roughly 2/3 of all three empires would be left untouched. On the other hand, if the Islamic Empire were to be fully revived today, and Jesus returned and conquered this empire, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece would by virtue all be completely destroyed as well. Once again, the Islamic Empire fulfills the criteria and requirements of the text in Daniel, while the Roman Empire does not match at all. The dream of Daniel chapter 2 was not intended to reveal the future of America, nor was it intended to reveal the future of Europe. Instead, the dream was simply showing Nebuchadnezzar those kingdoms that would succeed his. Let's briefly review the history of the region to understand why the Roman Empire was not included in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Exactly as the prophecy declared, Babylon did fall to the Medo-Persian Empire. Later, the Medo-Persian Empire was also conquered by the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. Medo-Persia and Greece were very similar in the scope and regions they controlled. They both very clearly succeeded Nebuchadnezzar ruling over Babylon. But in the midst of Alexander's conquest of the region, he died prematurely, leaving his empire to be quartered out among his generals or successors. The fourfold division of the Alexandrian Greek Empire is discussed in great detail in Daniel's chapter 8 and 11. The most significant of these divisions was the Seleucid Dynasty, which came to rule over much of the Middle East, from modern-day Turkey all the way to Pakistan and Afghanistan. But eventually the Seleucid dynasty also saw its power wane, signaling the final decline of Greek Hellenistic dominion over the Middle East. It was during this period that the Parthian Peoples came to power in the region. The Parthians were a Medo-Persian tribe from northern Iran who came to control much of the Middle East for roughly 500 years. After the Parthian period, the Sassanids, another Persian people, were able to consolidate power throughout the region, maintaining control for another 400 years until they were conquered by the invading Arab Muslims. So it was that the powerful and well-organized Islamic Empire came and absolutely conquered the entire region that the dream of Daniel 2 describes. So looking back at the image of Daniel, the four divisions of the statue are as follows. As you can see here, the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire, the chest and arms of silver were Medo-Persia, the belly and thighs of bronze were Greece, and the legs of iron is the Islamic Empire. As we have already seen, while the Islamic Empire did completely conquer the entire region of ancient Babylon, as well as all of the former landholdings of Medo-Persia and Greece, the Roman Empire did not conquer all of these regions. When we compare maps of Medo-Persia or Greece to a map of the Roman Empire, it becomes quite clear that the dominion of the Roman Empire was significantly more westward. The Roman Empire does not align itself to the context of the dream, and so was not included. For the overwhelming majority of its roughly 1,500 years of existence, the boundaries of the Roman empires were firmly set roughly 500 miles west of Babylon. There was, however, one very brief period of time when this was not the case. This occurred in the year 116 AD, when Emperor Trajan set his heart to expand the Roman Empire further east. He crossed the Euphrates, sailed down the Tigris River, and established temporary control over the ancient ruins of the cities of Babylon and Susa. But within a short span of mere months, three things happened that would force Rome to forever abandon its brief hold on Babylon. First, in Judea, a rebellion broke out among the Jews. This required a significant deployment of troops to respond to the rebellion. Second, the conquered Parthians began fighting back against the Roman incursion into their territories. And third, Trajan suffered what many historians believe was a stroke. He quickly withdrew from the region and within weeks was dead. The Romans were forced to abandon their very brief grip on Babylon and Mesopotamia. Trajan's chosen successor, Hadrian, prefect of the eastern Roman provinces, seeing the foolishness of Trajan's brief efforts to extend the empire east, withdrew the Roman troops from both Babylon and Armenia and formally declared the boundaries of the Roman Empire to forever remain west beyond the Euphrates. You can see clearly from this map that Rome did not conquer the Middle Eastern nations. Historian Dean Merivale summarizes the Romans' situation when he says, "There was no soil beyond the Euphrates in which the Roman institutions could take root, while the expense of maintaining them would have been utterly exhausting." Because Nebuchadnezzar's dream of Daniel chapter 2 is a Babylon-centered prophecy that deals with a period that spans over 2,600 years, the Roman Empire's very brief stint into Mesopotamia was simply not of sufficient significance to be included as one of the metallic divisions of the dream image. The only empires that were included are the three empires that did, in fact, actually conquer and establish a substantial rule over Babylon and the greater surrounding region. After describing the legs of iron, Daniel begins to describe the feet, which are a mixture of iron and baked clay. Although overall emphasis of the prophecy is placed on the fourth kingdom, the last empire before Jesus returns is technically not the legs of iron, but the feet of mixed iron and clay. Or perhaps it would be more appropriate to say that the fourth empire will consist of two phases. The key to seeing this twofold phase of the fourth empire is in the following portion of the scripture. In Daniel 2, it says, "The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay." A literal word-for-word rendering of the original Aramaic text arranged in order provides us with the following breakdown of the statue. As you can see here, this statue was actually broken down into 5 sections. The head of fine gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet part iron and part clay. It is quite clear that there are not merely 4, but rather 5 distinct sections of the statue. There is a clear distinction between the legs, which are considered as strong as iron, and the feet, which are described as partly strong and partly brittle. There is both a 4th and a 5th division of the statue. However, because of the continuity between the legs and the feet through the element of iron, as well as the fact that nowhere does Daniel ever refer to the 5th empire, there is also reason to believe that these last 2 empires are very much related and should simply be understood as Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the 4th empire. Many Bible scholars and Bible teachers have understood the 4th empire to be the Roman Empire and the 5th empire to be a revived last days version of the Roman Empire. However, as I have discussed in this video, the Roman Empire does not sufficiently meet the criteria of the text to be confidently considered the 4th kingdom, whereas the Islamic Empire fulfills all of the criteria perfectly. So it makes sense that the 2 distinct phases of the statue would be the historical Islamic Empire, which would be the legs of iron, and a revived version of the Islamic Empire, which would be the feet of mixed iron and clay. So after considering all these facts, the empires of Nebuchadnezzar's dream should be understood as follows. As you can see here, the head of fine gold was Babylon, breast and arms of silver were Medo-Persia, belly and thighs of brass are Greece, legs of iron, the Islamic Empire, and the feet part of iron and part of clay would be the revived Islamic Empire, which would be the Antichrist Empire in the last days before the return of Christ. In Daniel 2, verse 41, we are told of a defining characteristic of the final Antichrist kingdom is that it would be divided. In Daniel 2:41 it says, "And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom." While the Roman Empire certainly experienced a period of division, divided is certainly not an appropriate term to define its overall existence. On the other hand, divided is a perfect term to describe the Islamic community. Shortly after Muhammad died, a division broke out between the Shia, which is the minority sect of roughly 14% of all Muslims, who felt as though the successorship belonged to Muhammad's relatives, and the Sunnis, the majority sect of Muslims at 86%, they felt as though the successorship belonged to them. This division has defined Islam from its earliest days to modern times. For years, as the war in Iraq unfolded, we were treated to daily reports of sectarian violence, with Sunnis killing Shia and vice versa. Today, this term is simply used with reference to the intra-Islamic violence that has been so common throughout Islamic history. And so once more, it is fair to say that the Roman Empire does not fulfill the criteria of Daniel 2:41, while the Islamic Empire fulfills it perfectly. The book of Revelation, the 17th chapter, has more to say about the march of world powers, and I will get into that in more detail in this video series. But before we go to Revelation, I want to first take a look at the four beasts of Daniel chapter 7 and see what they show us about this end times Antichrist empire and where it comes from. But that will have to wait until my next video, seeing that this video has gotten a bit longer than usual. So stay tuned for Daniel chapter 7, my next video, and thanks very much for watching.